Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here this evening. My name is Jody. I work for a company called Environics Research, and our organization was commissioned by the Toronto Police Services Board to undertake these public consultations on the topic of the job description for Toronto's next Chief of Police. Before we start this evening, I'd like to acknowledge that as participants joining together virtually tonight, we're coming together on land that is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. A few notes on our session this evening and what to expect as we're together for the next couple of hours. Environics Research has been commissioned by the Toronto Police Services Board to undertake these broad public consultations and conversations to define the qualities and characteristics for the job description for the search for Toronto's next Chief of Police. We're here to hear your feedback from residents and stakeholder groups across the city. We will be taking your feedback to create an evaluation framework for those who will be ultimately identifying, interviewing, and vetting candidates for the job of Chief of Police. It is not our responsibility, and during this consultation process, we will not be identifying, vetting, or appointing any candidates for the role of Chief of Police. And throughout these discussions, we won't be influencing broader policy discussions and decisions that are currently before the Toronto Police Services Board or the City of Toronto. In terms of our agenda for this evening and what you can expect over the next couple of hours, I'm in the welcome and the terms of participation process right now, and we'll just dispense with some of that administrative information about participating tonight. And then we'll jump into our discussion that are part of policing in Toronto these days. After our issues discussion, we will be breaking into smaller, and I have some colleagues of mine from Environics who are on the call this evening who will facilitate those small group discussions where we will be talking specifically about qualities and characteristics of the Chief of Police. During that period, we will not be able to see the discussion on the YouTube channel where this forum is currently being broadcast. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. We'll return from the small group breakouts and we'll talk as a plenary again about how we prioritize the qualities and characteristics that we discussed in smaller groups. There will be a polling activity at that stage so we can determine priorities together. We've got some time to talk about the process by which the chief is appointed in Toronto before we wrap up by 8 o'clock this evening. Some of the terms for engaging in our conversation this evening, there are many people who are part of this call, and it is my job to make sure that we hear from as many people as possible. You're encouraged to do so using the chat function, which hopefully everybody has found. If you haven't used it before, if you scroll your cursor on your bar should pop up on the bottom and you will see the chat. As well, there is a function that allows you to raise your hand. That way we can see you in the list and call on you if you would like to speak and address. Two ways in which you can do that this evening. We're going to ask people just to limit distractions and background noise when you're speaking to the group so that we can hear you clearly. Again, I mentioned the chat, so please use that. It's an official record for this conversation, so your comments will be captured there and become part of the record as we synthesize everything we're hearing from these discussions. We We understand that it means that this is an important topic to people who have made time to be here this evening. What we don't welcome are personal attacks or the use of foul or abusive language. Our technicians will remove anybody who launches a personal attack or is not respectful of other people's participation. You'll be removed from the meeting and not permitted to return. Your participation tonight is anonymous and voluntary. You've been invited to use usernames. I will use the usernames if you've put your hand up and I call on you to speak. So I'll do my best to pronounce those and say them as intended. But we will not be attributing any comments this evening to anybody specifically or identifying anybody in the synthesis of the information that we hear back from these sessions. Because we want to give everybody a chance who would like to speak to do so, your comments will be timed this evening. Our technicians have a timer. You will hear a bell at 1 minute and 30 seconds, and at 2 minutes, we will have to cut you off. I apologize in advance to anyone who gets cut off. It really is important that we hear from whomever would like to speak this evening, so we'll be doing our very best to do so. A reminder that the chat function is there if you don't get a chance to speak and would like to provide comments. And finally, we are recording for our use when we can refer back for our synthesis and analysis of what we heard during the sessions. In addition, this session is being broadcast on the Toronto Police Services YouTube channel. And a recording is taking place there as well, and that will be available on the Toronto Police Services YouTube channel for future reference for anybody who would like to view the recording. When we move to during this evening's discussion, that will not be captured on the YouTube broadcast, so we'll just see a screen that says we'll be back shortly, just to let everyone know that's how that works. If there are any questions about what I outlined as our process this evening, we will get into your comments and issues momentarily, but I just wanted to clarify any questions about process, anything I'm able to answer for you before we dive into our discussion this evening. And I'm going to do my very best to scroll. We're a large group this evening, so making sure I'm looking through hands, or if you have a question in the chat, I'm having a look for that too, and I apologize for any delay that results as I scroll. Okay, so if we don't have any questions, then I would very much like to launch into our discussion, thanking everyone again for making the time to be here this evening. As we get into our discussion about Toronto's next Chief of Police, it's important that we understand what the issues are that this next Chief of Police is going to face in that role. And so I'd like to ask, again, please, if you find the raise your hand function, or if someone would like to pose a question or offer an issue in the chat, we'll have a chance to hear from you. The raise your hand icon, if you scroll over your screen, you will see a function bar come up on the bottom. Under participants, there's a function that lets you do that. All right, and I see Sean has his hand up. Sean, we'll start with you. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and tell us what is on your mind in terms of issues.
I think one of the big issues facing the Toronto Police is their sense of separateness that they see as enhancing the police service and the police force, not as contributing collectively to community safety and ceding ground in response to other parties. So I guess the best example of that is as people have expressed concern about police interventions on mental health, and the city has invested in a non-police response to mental health. The police have just gone ahead and invested a whole bunch more money in police responses to mental health, even though they're not really trained for it, and there are other strategies coming forward. So being able to step back as well as step forward so that they contribute to a collective response to safety rather than just their own response would be helpful.
Thanks very much, Sean. Thank you for those comments. I see, just so you know, I'm going to call on Jasmine next, and then David and Waleed. And I want to thank everybody who's also putting comments in the chat. We see those and we're taking note of those as well. So Jasmine, why don't you go next, please?
Thank you. And I just want to confirm you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So building on what was just said, I think I was going to say mental health, but I can continue on that. I think that there is a lack of trust and or understanding of the issues that marginalized communities face in our community. For example, among the LGBTQ community and among others. And so I think that a challenge is finding meaningful community ways that these communities would like resources to be directed, or I should say redirected, towards more meaningful ways to help keep them healthy and safe.
Great. Thank you so much, Jasmine. I see David next, and then I see Roy. David, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you, Jody, and thanks everybody. I have been the recipient of good police services, but I also represent police or people who have been received very poor services from Toronto Police, and that is not an exception. I would like the new police chief, if we are getting one, to look at ways that they can cut their budget because we're in a global pandemic, and a huge amount of resources dedicated to policing just doesn't make sense. So look to, and I think that should include areas that they can hand off services to people who are better able to provide this. Test cases we're doing with mental health services right now. I would like to look to community leaders who are providing safe solutions to collective neighborhood safety and community safety initiatives.
Thanks very much, David. Thank you for those comments. And thank you to those who are adding to the chat. Waleed, I had you next in line. Why don't you, is your hand still up? I'm just checking. It looks like you may have added to the chat. So I'm going to move on to Roy N. Roy, why don't you go ahead?
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so I think my point pertains to recruitment. I'd like to see more Toronto recruits. Like, you have to live here for at least 5 years before you apply. I think that would be pretty good. So, and to limit outside of Toronto and the GTA to, like, as a last resort. That's it.
Okay, thanks very much, Roy. Waleed, I see your hand up again. I've asked you to unmute, so go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this session. I hope you folks can hear me.
Yes,
can you
thank you
folks
for
hear my
being here.
voice well?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So I just wanted to share some concerns with regards to the process and some things that we could work together on. Just my experience as a community organizer and supporting youth in our community. I'm distraught that many young people see the police as not a safe, but more of a safe, way of contact to get services or support, but see them more of a threat. I've seen the physical body language change when police are around. I've seen them draw back when the police are around, and it speaks to the culture of policing in the city that needs to be changed. It needs to on community, supporting residents, supporting the needs. So when I think of policing, I think it's sort of like shifted more away from its, sort of like mandate to support community safety, and more towards, not just enforcement, but the process of by which community folks are supported seems lacking, and there's structural reasons as to that.
Okay.
When I think of community members who've asked for community safety, they want people who live in the community, people who are invested in them. And when they realize that the folks who are in those fancy police cars, are folks who don't even live in the community, it's something that needs to change.
Okay.
The other thing that I want to point out.
Sorry,
is
Waleed. I'm sorry. I'm going to need to cut you off because I've got a.
It's my last point.
Okay.
The
Can you do a
Ontario
quick?
Human Rights. Yes, I can. The
Thank you.
Ontario Human Rights Commission having report that also that focused on TPS, Toronto Police Services operations, and the impact on Black members of our community who've been disproportionately targeted. But one of the things that was missing was the impact of overcharging, specifically when it comes to young access to housing. So the fact that they've been pushed out of Toronto community housing or other housing providers due to the impact of overcharging. If you read the report, you will come to the realization that overcharging affects Black Indigenous folks the most, right? And that's just out there in the Ontario Human Rights Commission report. So what I would like is a response from the folks who are going to try to pick the new leadership of Toronto Police Services on what policy changes, what investments, what change we're going to see.
Okay, Waleed, I'm sorry. We've developed a queue of people who would like to ask questions, so I'm going to keep moving on. I invite you to include your comments in the chat, and we will make sure that those get recorded. We do want to be talking about the issues because we're going to be asking about the qualities of the chief of police that ultimately are going to be able to address these. I see Johan next, and then Anna B after that. Johan, go ahead, please. Thank you for waiting.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. I'm just wondering if you can repeat the initial question for me.
We're just interested to hear from folks who have joined us tonight what they consider to be the top issues facing Toronto Police Services right now. I don't know if you're on a screen. We've got the question up on a screen as well, so you can see. And
okay, great. I am on my phone, so it's a little bit difficult to see.
No problem.
Where to start in just 2 minutes? Excessive force, lack of training, and also something that I have even brought up in deputations in the past is a complete lack of training. 24 weeks should not be sufficient to be given a lethal weapon in order to, quote unquote, serve and protect people. I think the way that, going back of people these officers not knowing and understanding the communities that they are working in. So there needs to be an epic expansion of what is involved in training, because it should not just be about lethal force and, things of that nature. It needs to be about understanding community.
Okay.
It needs to be about mental health issues. And beyond that, there really needs to be a defunding. And I really think someone who's going to be in this role needs to be progressive and look at some of the other models and other police forces that have, divested large sums of money in order to better serve the community, because the police do not best serve the community.
Thanks very much, Johan. Thank you. Anna B is next, and then Reverend Jeff Rock is next. So Anna, go ahead, please.
Sure. Mine's pretty quick, actually. I think someone mentioned earlier, something to the effect of effective use of resources. I'm just kind of speaking personally. The speed of response, or having someone respond after you've placed a report, is either very slow, like in the 5 to 6 hour range, where the situation that was going down, if it wasn't, like a stabbing, for example, obviously that's the most serious situation, but the speed of response I've received when I've placed a report has been like minimal to no. So I'm sure it probably stems from that ineffective use of resources. But that's something that I think is a top issue, is just resources and response time.
Great. Thanks very much, Anna. Reverend Jeff is next. Why don't you go ahead, please?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, thank you. Go
Great.
ahead.
I think when it comes to a police chief, it needs to be somebody with visionary leadership. I think it's undeniable that there are conflicting priorities, and things like, the Toronto Police Association and then the Toronto Board, which are sometimes in conflict with each other, and community calls for less policing and faster response times at the same time. So I think the new police chief will need to have visionary leadership and be a bold, strong leader who exemplifies courage to try new and different things, and doesn't seek to be, liked by all parties, because that's an impossible reality in the role of policing.
Understood. Thank you so much, Reverend. Thanks for being on the call. I see Mitchell next, and then Nancy after that. Mitchell, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. I agree with Reverend Rock very strongly that it's a style of leadership and the ability to apply optimal management techniques to the police force. And that includes the ability to confront, but not necessarily unnecessary confrontation, but the ability to confront those elements in the police force and in the society that resist the kinds of change that are needed, some of which have already been discussed. And so there has been a lot of research and thinking about how optimally to manage police resources, about how to manage the use of data and technology, which is changing everything and should also change the way that the police are managed. And those are the kinds of things that I think we need to look for in the new police chief.
Great. Thank you so much, Mitchell. I want to keep hearing from people. I've got a queue here, so I'm going to do my best to work my way through. To give people the context of some other questions we want to ask, and if maybe it helps to put your comments into context as well. Some of the things we'd like to know from you this evening: what are some of the words that you would use to describe the Toronto Police Service today? And as well, what are some of the words that you'd like to be able to use to describe the police service 5 years from now? So that's not to take us away from the issues discussion, because I believe these are all related, and I will continue to move my way down the list of hands here, but that's some other questions we'd like you to consider, and that we will be taking notes as we proceed through this part before we go into the breakout rooms. So Nancy, we said you'd be next. Please go ahead.
Unmuted, correct?
You are.
Okay, great. So I'm going to use the word frightening for the police. When one sees the police, we're frightened. I have a great advantage at being white, so I'm a lot less frightened than some other people. I am definitely in the 50% defund category. I would like to see a new chief of police be someone who actually would like to have the support of the community. And so a whole lot needs to change. One could begin by changing the demographic, yes, of people who live in Toronto. But if the demographic of the police department actually represents the city, 50% of the residents of the city of Toronto are women, and only 50% are white. So if our police force reflected that demographic, like really to the T, because I'm just tired of all the straight white men who are big and burly and, you know what, not particularly sensitive. I think we have figured out that, you know, queers don't have a great record. The number of times that queers went to the police saying we think there's a serial killer and we were just pushed away. But like just friggin' walking down the street black, driving Indigenous, walking down the street Indigenous. We need a chief of police to direct and make changes. We need to respect Black people. We need to respect Indigenous people. And we need to friggin' respect the poor people who are living on the street, who do not have the comfort that the rest of us have if we have a warm bed and a blanket and a faucet and maybe hot water. You know, it cannot be easy living that way. We need a chief of police who actually cares about the lower income people in our society. But seriously, we have an enormous problem with over policing of Black and Indigenous people who end up imprisoned in a way that other people don't. Eliminating weapons, I think, would be just a great idea, but we need a chief of police who actually wants to see a difference and wants to help figure out how to shift the budget away from...
Sorry, Nancy, I'm going to have to jump in because we've got a queue of other folks. Thank you so much. I see Roxy next, and then Sebastian's after that. Roxanne, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much. So I'm coming here wanting to really presence acquired brain injury, invisible disability, neurodivergence. Mm-hmm. And so in speaking to the issues, I think currently some of the key words are monocultural lens. It seems to be really the gaze from what I've experienced in my community in Kensington and different parts of Toronto okay. So, you know, words today, harm, triggering, upholding systemic oppressions. In the future, I'd love the words to be inclusive, decolonized, intersectional, interculturally effective, and heightened consciousness for what is invisible. So right now I see emergency response protocols and a culture of that, and an invisible violence in tone and even in the uniform and in the appearance. So going forward, shifting to a culture of harm prevention, harm reduction, community safety, and being not only trauma informed, but trauma sensitive, and even better yet, trauma responsive to the individual, but also the family and the community witnessing who are experiencing vicarious trauma through the witnessing. And so increased skills in intercultural, intersectional, decolonized communication and effectiveness and competency in this cultural, intersectional way. So values of really being here to really be inclusive. And the woman that just spoke before me, thank you. Thank you. Because I definitely feel that, and I'm in a racialized body. I have disability, and this is brain injury, which
thank you, Roxanne. Sorry, we've hit 2 minutes, so I'm going to need to move on. I'm keeping an eye on the timing as well this evening, because we do want an opportunity to break into smaller groups and give more people an opportunity to speak. So I am going to keep us moving, but I really do appreciate people who are putting their hands up to share with us. We'll keep moving through. Sebastian is next. If we don't hear from you, please do use the chat, and we will see your comments there. Sebastian, go ahead.
Thank you. So the words I use right now to describe the Toronto police is underappreciated. And the word I'd like to be able to use in the future is present. So I think the most important issues that the police chief would have to face are gun violence in Toronto, the threat of online predators and cybercrime. I think some of the participants on the call share my concerns about the serial killer that was targeting a marginalized community in Toronto, and that's something that affected my circle very deeply. So I think from my side of things, I don't feel safe in Toronto. And it's not because of anything that the police has done other than not being there when I needed them. I've had many death threats, most of them from that before making it a racial issues. It's not possible to get calls answered in a fast enough time when those things happen. We've had attempted break-ins. We've had cars on our street vandalized. We've had my dog physically attacked by a person that was suffering from drug addiction. And I would say that I would want to see a police chief that has the ability to put their primary mission first, which is to keep the citizens and the residents and even the vagrants of the city safe, instead of bowing down to whatever the political environment in the United States dictates.
Okay, thank you very much, Sebastian. Thank you for your comments this evening. I have Tom next, and then Amy is behind Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Right.
Oh, there you are, Tom. Hi.
Thank you, Jody. I would like to see a chief who is 21st century, who is all for high tech, who's all for assigning resources to get closed circuit in the trouble areas. I would like to see a chief who is a local, like somebody said before me, at least living here for years. I had the pleasure of meeting Chief McCormick in the 90s. And prior to him being the chief, he was a detective in Toronto, and he knows the community, all of the communities, really well. So I would like to see somebody who is here for at least 10, 15 years in or something to do with the police. So he knows what it is all about, what Toronto communities are all about. And I also like somebody who are really sensitive to mental health problems in this community, in this city here. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. I see next we have Amy, and then Betty is next. Amy, go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Hi everyone, thank you all for being here, and thank you all I'd like to see less police officers or ex-police officers investigating police misconduct. Independent services with different perspectives, as well as education on these matters, is something that I think would be very valuable, as well as holding accountability to the public with that. And words I would like to one day use for police services is anti-oppressive, restorative, community connectors, and de-escalators.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. Betty. Are you there, Betty?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. I'm a white woman in my late 70s, and I haven't had an awful lot of experience personally with the police. Once over 55 years, I called the poor part of town, and I called them over and over because someone was pounding the door down of my third floor walk-up apartment, but they never showed up. And another time when I lived in a more middle class area, they showed up for something to bring my wallet that had been stolen out of my kitchen. So that's my experience personally with the police. But I worked in immigrant services for many years and in the area of adult literacy, which has many marginalized people involved. And over 50 years and worked with Black Education Project, told me for the first time about the talk that parents of Black children had to talk to, the talk they had to have with their teenage boys in particular on how to survive any encounter with the police, and to warn them that those encounters would be frequent and uncalled for. And I'm so sad to know that that is still going on over 50 years ago. The other issue I wanted to raise was related to homelessness. And I think, well, first I want to say, I know it's a challenge to get a chief who's accepted by the unionized membership, but also by the community and can make change and transformative change. And I am kind of in favor of defunding certain aspects of the police. And one of the areas I want to mention is homelessness, because there's massive over policing of the homeless now. And, you know, they can't sleep anywhere, they can't pee anywhere, they can't wash anywhere. And basically, I'd like to see that cut way, way back and spend the money. And that's where it's going to be a challenge for any police chief to look at lowering budgets of police and putting the money into supported homes and other areas that people have mentioned, mental health. Another thing is the train.
So hear from one more person in the plenary now, but just a reminder, we're going to break off into smaller groups. So you will have speaking with a facilitator. So I don't want to discourage anyone with their hands up. Marlene is next on my screen here. Marlene, why don't you go ahead? Are you there, Marlene? I thought I just unmuted you. Okay, let me go. Lauren, you're next. Can you go ahead?
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you.
Oh,
I'll be quick. I know. Oh, can you hear me okay? Yeah, wonderful. Just speaking about words that come to mind when I think about the police service now: ineffective, dangerous, racist, sexist, homophobic, costly, outdated, overpaid, unknowledgeable, undereducated, and a dangerous gang themselves. In the future, I hope to see collaboration. I hope to see legislative change. I hope to see representation of women, and I would love to see a woman in charge. And that's everything. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Lauren. Thank you for that. Apologies to people who we haven't heard from here, but want you to keep your hands up and your interest as we move into our smaller breakout rooms and give as many people as possible an opportunity to speak with facilitators specifically, and we've started to hear about that already, but we're going to focus the discussion a little more and talk about specific characteristics, qualities, and traits that you'd like to see in the next chief of police. The tech folks who are kind of behind the curtain here helping me out are going to just randomly assign people to 4 different discussion groups. You will encounter one of my colleagues, a facilitator, when you arrive there, and then you will be automatically brought back to this session when that period of discussion is over. So you don't need to do anything on your computer, although we will ask you to continue to observe the same terms that we've been using for this part of the discussion. And by that, limiting comments to 2 minutes, please, at a maximum, being respectful of the people in the group with you, giving it. And then when we come back, we will have more opportunity to hear from others in the plenary. I need to keep the discussion moving, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to ask my tech to move us into those breakout rooms. Please, everybody, just hang tight. You'll see your screen direct you, and then we will we'll come back to the plenary. And I'm going to put Marlene on the list to hear from when we come back to the plenary first.
everybody.
Hi.
I'm Victoria, so I popped out of nowhere. I'm with Environics Research. I'm a researcher there, and so I'm helping.
All right, we're all coming back. Welcome back from the breakout rooms. We'll just give another moment or so as people return. And I'll ask my colleague, Victoria, to share her screen. Yes, and Wally, thank you for the reminder. Marlene had a comment and we didn't get a chance to hear from her when we were last in the plenary. And I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through my list again. If there was something you wanted to add, or maybe you had an opportunity to talk about that in your breakout room. Maybe you're not even with us anymore. Some people have been coming and going. Marlene. I'm just looking in the chat. So Marlene, if you would like to revisit your comments, please put your hand up. If you don't, that's just fine too. I don't want to put anybody on the spot if you've had a chance to have your say. So you put your hand up if you would, if there's something you'd like to add. All right, Victoria, let's go to you. And I'm looking, I don't see Marlene's hand up.
Oh, I see Marlene there.
Oh, there. Okay, you weren't down at the bottom of my. Thank you, Marlene. Please go ahead. Marlene, are you there? I'm worried you're still on mute. We unmuted you.
Thank you. I was muted. Hi. Yeah. I'll try to keep this short as possible. Several years ago, the police, what was I going to say? The mayor and the Toronto Services Board did a really wonderful study on looking at policing in Toronto. And it was really exceptional, except it sat there and it sat there. And I really believe that part of the reason it sat there was the police union. And what I'd like to see in a police chief is somebody secure enough in himself and brave enough not to be intimidated by the police union. Every time we have some kind of new policy coming in, every time the union is against it, it disappears. And let me say right here, I am a union person. I believe in unions. I've never been in a union myself, but I fundamentally believe that it's important to have unions, including the police. But we have a very, very strong police union. And I think in Toronto, we've been held hostage by the police union when it comes to policy making. Every time they wish to, they can shut policy.
Marlene, we seem to have. Are you there, Marlene? Oh, there you are.
That will protect their own bad players at any cost, at any cost. And it's very hard to protect or to stay feeling good about the police if they'll protect their own without worrying about what is best for the city. That's really all I wanted to say. Look after us, not the unions.
Understood. Thank you very much. And let's see what's come out of our breakout sessions and if there's anything further to that. Thank you. And I'm glad we had a chance to hear from you. So I'm going to go to our facilitators who are going to, as succinctly as possible, share what they learned in their breakout rooms and provide us with the top themes that came out of the discussion. I'll get started only because our group was number one in the chronology, and I do see people up more of an opportunity. But right now, what we need to do is focus on creating this list so we can get everybody to vote because we want to know what the group priorities are. So we see hands up. We're going to endeavor to get to those very shortly. Okay, so Victoria, I'm going to offer up some themes from our group, and then we'll call on the other facilitators and hear what they heard. So one of the qualities coming out of the discussion in group number 1, and I'll share the language that we chose for these themes, is a radical change maker or manager. So radical was important in recognition of the degree of change that participants felt needed to take place. Somebody who's a critical thinker, that came up a lot. So somebody who's prepared to look at things like the budget, to look reflectively at what's going on inside the service, and to think critically about the situation. Somebody who's aware of the cultural biases that exist within the various systems. So whether it's legal system, so they aware of cultural biases, and they have an equity lens, an awareness of that. Somebody who's empathetic. So somebody who's able to listen and be honest and demonstrate those qualities. So empathy, empathetic. And I'm going to sneak in one more, but we can negotiate as we hear other ones come in. Someone who has a mindset for diversity, and we acknowledge that the term diversity needs to be within the context of the police service, but somebody who has lived experience and understands what diversity means. Susan, can I call on you next to report back from your?
Of course, thanks, Jody. So I think there are some common themes that kind of came out of our discussion as well. So one of them being a display of strong leadership, and this display of strong leadership kind of, is an umbrella over a lot of the characteristics that you mentioned too, that being, empathetic, compassionate, having integrity, also being a change maker or change agent, transparent, and able to lead change was one. The other was being committed to community. So that's social justice, to diversity, which also in a way lends them social credibility to be able to take action in the ways that matter. Another one that actually hasn't been mentioned yet was also having strategic management skills and business acumen. So understanding the inner workings of organizational culture and know-how, and being able to navigate that. And then the final one is a sense of fearlessness. So being secure in themselves, and I think Marlene kind of touched on that, but just being secure in themselves and able to deal with, those pressures, and standing by their beliefs and activating change.
Great, thanks very much, Susan. Thanks for that feedback from your group. VJ, you were a facilitator as well. Do you have any duplicates of what we have here? Anything to add to this list? I want to make sure we...
Sorry, I was muted. One of the things that came up in our group was, so there was kind of history and experience, which I think is kind of covered. That was really talking about, like, if we're looking for someone who's bold and visionary, what experience and history can they demonstrate that shows that? Trust in building community, I think that's covered through a lot of these other ones. One thing that did come up that I don't know if it's completely covered here is connectedness to a broader agenda. And what we really talked about there was around having themselves or seeing themselves as part of a bigger whole. So being able to connect with other community partners, other agencies, et cetera, and not just focus only insularly on the police. And change and reform, which was really around having change management skills, but also committed to kind of creating more reform and becoming a more progressive agency.
Great, thanks very much, VJ. Yeah, a lot of duplication, but also some distinctions based on the groups and who is participating. Victoria is typing furiously to keep up with us, and she was the last facilitator. Victoria, do you want to add your qualities to your themes to the list? Let us know if there were duplicates, or if you've got some new things to add.
Yeah, so quite a few of these were mentioned in our group. So we came out with reformist, which Vijay already mentioned. We had definitely change maker, change leader. So I'm actually just right now going to combine those so that we can come down to a final 10. We also had accountable to communities and a community advocate. So very much connected here to the committed to community. So I'm just gonna put a slash here and put accountable to communities. And the last one that I didn't see here is humble and reflective. So that could also tie into big picture minded, thinking about larger things. So I'll just add that there. That was our main findings.
Thanks very much, Victoria. So how have we done in terms of getting ourselves down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, we have 10. And we recognize that this is not all of the qualities that we heard this evening. There are more extensive lists from each of those discussions, and those will become part of the record from this discussion. So those are not lost, but we're doing our very best to consolidate and create a synthesized list of qualities. What we'd like to do now, and again, our tech folks are working in the background, they're programming in a poll that we will see on the screen and ask people, once that's on the screen, to pick your top 3 qualities from the list. And we see the hands are up, and we will have an opportunity to hear from folks once the polling is done as well, so that you can expand on any of these. So there is still time, and we will call on people and hear from you. I'm just checking with our tech folks to see if we are ready to launch the poll yet. Maybe they need another minute. Do our tech folks have I want to give everybody a chance to consider this list, and then we will get to hear reactions. Just checking with our tech folks. Okay, and our poll is live on the screen. Participation is voluntary, of course, but this is how we get a chance to get a sense of the priorities from the folks who attend these discussions. From the list below, we're asking people to select your top qualities. If you could pick 3, that helps us to understand what the priorities are. Obviously, these are all important. These came out of our discussions this evening, so we recognize that these are important to everybody. In the interest of trying to prioritize these and see what are the priorities of the people who are participating tonight, we're going to ask people to select your top 3. So you see the polling countdown on the top there. I'll give you another minute to consider these. We see your comments in the chat as well. This should be a multi-select. Are we able to select more than one? Sorry, we might have had a bit of a technical thing. Working on that. Oh, looks like we're going to relaunch. There was just a technical issue. We do want you to pick more than one. We don't want to limit you to one, so it's going to involve us relaunching the poll. So if everybody can just hang tight for a moment, we will. Okay, so in the interest of, we need a little more time to program that and launch it again. So I'm going to ask Howard. I see your hand. I'm going to ask you to. If you've got 2 minutes worth of a comment while we program, please go ahead.
Good evening. My concern is with the consultation process itself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to demean these town halls, but I hope you realize you're only hearing from people who have a unique interest in policing.
Mm.
If any board members are viewing this or listening, it is critical that each board member go into the communities, for example, Weston Road and Eglinton, buy $70 or $80 worth of pizza, get a bunch of kids in a park and listen to their stories. And secondly, do the same, not necessarily with pizza, with the parents of kids in those areas and particularly mothers. If you ask them face to face what it would take to restore any trust in the police, their answers to that question will tell you exactly what the higher. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Howard. And just so you know, these conversations there are a series of them. These are the public ones. There are other community specific conversations that are taking place throughout this process. So just to let you know, these aren't the only ones, but acknowledge what you said. Thank you very much. I'm going to go in the list and call on someone we haven't had a chance to. I see Vera, which please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to address that as well, kind of what Howard said. One, like what kind of people are we not hearing from because this is online, the ways that it was advertised, those kinds of things. So hopefully there are, as much as possible, in-person versions of this. And also, I don't think we're actually aligned, just based on what I'm seeing in the chat, on these buckets. So one thing is like, I love there was someone who made a distinction, Dylan, between fearlessness and courageous, or fearlessness and courage rather. I think they are different, but important. And then some of these are just kind of like, they're very broad. So like demonstrated experience in what was a comment. So I don't know if we maybe could spend like 5 minutes just getting feedback from people on the themes themselves, and if we feel they actually represent what was discussed.
Okay, thanks very much, Vera. And to reiterate, we do have more extensive notes and context from our small group discussions. So we definitely are able to add more context around these terms and understand that the exercise here was to synthesize them and bring them to this group. And I understand that it's hard to capture everything that we heard. We're doing our very best. We are ready to relaunch the poll. And thank you for the folks who caught that it was only taking one answer. We just had to unclick a box. So it's been relaunched. You can select more than one option now. We're asking you to pick your top 3, but if there's only 2, or if there are 4, if you can't limit it to 3, we'll give you that opportunity. So please go ahead and make your selections now, and then we can see as the group what came to the top. I'm going to give people a chance to do that. I'm just watching the numbers and who's had a chance to. Well, your voting is anonymous. We don't know who's voting. I'm just tracking the numbers of people to make sure we get as many people as who would like to participate in this poll. Yes, we'll have the results. We'll show the results on screen when this is complete. So we have just about everybody in. I'll give you another few seconds for people who haven't had a chance yet and who would still like to register their their selections, their priorities. I see 52 of 58. We'd like to give everybody the opportunity. The poll should automatically show up on people's screens. I'm not sure what it looks like if you're calling in from a phone. I hope it shows up on your screen. If you haven't had a chance to contribute to the polling here on the screen, there is always the chat, and those comments are part of the record of this discussion. So I think I haven't seen the numbers move, so we'll close the polling now. And if your priorities didn't pop up here, please feel free to put those into the chat and we will see them. So if everybody can see the results of our poll on the screen, it looks as though the top priority that came out of this polling is being committed and accountable to communities, and the various traits that contribute to that perspective. Change was also very popular. 67% of you chose that among your priorities. Having the diversity mindset and the equity lens, 52%, so more than half selected that among priorities as well. So these numbers are being captured, and they will be synthesized with other groups there, and we thank you very much for your contribution, your participation in those small group discussions, and then the work that's been done to synthesize and prioritize things here. I see hands up. We have a couple of questions left that we had wanted to cover. I do just want to share some information. I'm going to ask Victoria to on the screen, please, if we go to the next slide. Just a couple of notes about the process that we're in now and the process that leads to the selection, the appointment of the new chief of police. So we're at step 1, according to this slide here. And the board, as I indicated at the beginning of the session, the board contracted with our firm, Environics, to consult with the public and various stakeholder groups to synthesize and create a list of qualities and characteristics for the new chief. The board also contracts with an executive search firm, who will use the job description that comes out of this process to undertake a search for qualified candidates. Candidates who are interested in the post are invited to apply. The board then has the responsibility of vetting the candidates, shortlisting and interviewing candidates, and ultimately appointing the successful candidate. So that's the progression of the process. Our questions as we wrap up the session, and I see people have their hands up, so we will come to you. But we're also curious to understand if there's anything else that you as residents of the city are interested in knowing about this process as it unfolds. What's important for Toronto to know about this process? So I'm going to go back to the list here and call on, I see Sandra, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Sandra.
Good evening. I've loved this evening. I think everyone's comments have been great. I just have a personal view that I'm okay if our chief is not from Toronto. Our last chief was from Toronto. He was a homicide detective for I don't know, ever. And sometimes given the challenges that the new chief is going to face and all of the repair work that's required for the city, it might be a good idea to have somebody who can agree with the union or the city council or anybody. And maybe he could do it or she could do it. Obviously, it would be great if it was a she. But I just want to put it on the record that I hope the search committee looks far and wide because there are some good candidates out there. Sadly, 2 of the top female members have left the service. And maybe that's why I'm biased, that I'd like the service to look further, or the board to look further to get a woman. But again, I'd like them to cast the net wide and get the best possible person. Thanks.
Understood. Thanks very much, Sandra. Doris, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, in this process, from step 1 to step 2, does the board influence these qualities that come through from the Environics recommendations? So if you come to the board and say, here's the top 5 characteristics, and they say, oh no, we don't agree with that, do they change it?
That is not how the process has been laid out. The board may be observing and listening to conversations as they unfold, but we are a third-party group who has been tasked with having these conversations and creating the list of competencies based on what it is that we hear.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Doris. King. Are you there, Kingsley? You got your mute off? Sorry, Kingsley, I'm scrolling. Do you have your mute off? All right, if I'm sorry, I don't see you. Oh, Kingsley, there you are. You had your hand up. Okay. If you have a comment and want to get back in the queue, please put your hand up and we will hear from you. Pauline, go ahead.
I did put a comment in the chat, and this is not anything you can control, but I have my concerns about the current board. So I think the community can do its job, put the characteristics it requires. Executive search firm can do a great job, but ultimately that board will sit down and interview candidates and make their selection. And I'm sorry to say, but we know there are board members who have certain agendas to fill. So in the end, there's still a certain skepticism, so long as the board by itself is involved in that process. I wish that there could be additional people invited in for the interviewing process in addition to the board. That's really what I would want to see, like people from the community, community leaders who are invited to sit in the interviewing process. I think that would give greater confidence to community members.
Great, thanks very much, Pauline. Thanks for your comments. Miguel, go ahead.
Yes, I have several things I wanted to say that we have covered at the last group. But anyhow, I want to ask you a question. How much Environics is charging the City of Toronto or the Police Services Board for this consultation process? How much are we paying you?
The Toronto Police Services Board has given us a contract of $75,000 for this, for a very comprehensive process. It doesn't just involve these sessions.
All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Miguel. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so with all the feedback you guys are collecting today for this whole process, what is I'm just thinking about the weighting formula in terms of, because of the qualities and characteristics, how much weight is given to that the public's providing, and who are the other people that they're also looking at to get this input from?
Good question. Thanks, Mark. In total, we will be undertaking about 27 different discussions with different community organizations, representatives from across the city, residents, groups from within the police service, youth groups across the city. So very comprehensive discussion, and all of this information will be synthesized. We're going to share some more information towards the end of the session, but there's also an online survey that is available to residents who want to provide their input there. And everything that we hear is going to be synthesized into a report to the board that outlines what we have heard from the various groups and what is important in the search for the chief. Kingsley, I see you're back in the queue with your hand up. Go ahead. We're not having much luck. I'm not sure why. Kingsley, maybe you want to put your comments into the chat if we're having trouble hearing from you. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Yeah, something is going on with this because I unmuted and then it went back that way. So yes, I'm saying I represent the Black Action Defense Committee, which has been fighting against bad policing since we got founded and working with police to improve service. Now, going forward from the space we are on in 2021, one of the most essential, apart from the very management competencies which are required through years of policing and other management training, such as the the added leadership courses that are available to police, senior police officers. I believe that the significant training and acceptance of diversity and anti-Black racism will be an essential component of anyone that will succeed as a chief going forward. We've been fighting for these principles for many years. I've been dealing with Toronto police since 1970 and going on with different administration, high commands, etc. The proverbial lip service to these issues is no longer acceptable. And therefore, at top of the game of everything is a commitment to these fundamental principles and respect for the community. We have spent years at police services board and so on, making deputations and all kinds of things for them to just be ignored by a chief. We are not going to put up with it going forward. Therefore, we need to get a chief that respect these principles and respect the community and recognize that the police is part of the community, and unless they go back to the 9 principles enunciated by Sir Robert Peel, they cannot succeed.
Understood. Kingsley, thank you very much for your comments. I've got a queue of others, but thank you very much for those comments. AJ, I see your hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. I just had a question. I wanted to know, in terms of like the hiring process, what sort of tests are involved to determine whether or not this person is quote unquote visionary or quote unquote bold or all these other airy-fairy or idealistic adjectives that have been thrown around.
Okay. So I don't have an answer for you on that, but that is, we want to take a note of that as something that I'm assuming is important that you'd like to know in terms of this process. There's a executive search firm who will be, vetting the qualities and characteristics that we're raising here. I am not from the executive search firm, so I'm not able to comment on that process, but we have taken a note of that question. Thank you for that, AJ. Arlene McCalla. Arlene, go ahead.
Okay. what Kingsley said was sort of akin to what I was thinking of. And I also noticed in the note that, we wrote, it was written that he spoke to anti-racism. If it is not quite specific, very specific to anti-Black racism, then it gets watered down. If we only talk about diversity, then it gets watered down to cultural biases. It has to be really specific and speak to anti-Black racism. Because if you don't, then it's just there in the periphery, and then we're in the same place.
Understood. Thank you very much for that clarification. It's been noted. Again, asking what else do you want to know about the process to appoint a new chief? What needs to be shared with the public? What are you? How will you know when this process is over that a candidate has been appointed who represents the things that we have talked about here tonight? So I put those questions to you. Okay, hearing from folks we've heard from. Waleed, go ahead. You've got 2 minutes.
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Excellent. So there's been a major theme that the poll that we just did. I think about 37 of us, about 71%, basically when we were polled, said that we want a police chief that's committed or accountable to communities. I'd like to put forward a request, because many other speakers, many other residents of the city who were consulted in this session spoke to that theme and spoke to specifically the hiring process, where we said, we want more community involvement in the hiring of the police chief. And what I would like to propose is we would like to make sure this community representatives from the priority neighborhoods or from segments of this community that have completely been left out of the process as a means to build confidence in who this new reformer or someone who's going to be working with the communities to change the policing culture. So it's crucial. Like, I want to emphasize this point again. It's crucial that the community be at the table. This decision can be made in the boardrooms by just board members. And most importantly, we need to also ask through this process that reforms be implemented. Specifically, the Ontario Police Services Act needs to be changed to be able to set up the police chief and those communities to be able to succeed. We can't be setting them up for failure. And let's not forget, we're right now in the midst of the trial of where George Floyd was killed by Derek. That trial is ongoing and everyone's paying attention. And we just came out from a summer of peaceful protests calling for change. It will be disingenuous and disrespectful to communities if the report or the recommendation that moves forward by you folks does not emphasize that the community must be part of the hiring process if there's going to be any confidence in the process. If not,
I'm sorry, Waleed, the 2 minutes have transpired. Thank you very much for those comments, and your comments are noted here. AJ, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just think in terms of the second part of the slide where it says what should be shared, I think it's really important to share the number of people who applied to the job, as well as any demographic information. That way there can't be any type of uproar or outrage of people saying, why didn't you give the post to like a Black person, for example, if at the end of the day, let's say out of 300 people who applied, only about 2 were Black, you know what I mean? So I think just to sort of avoid that altogether, I think that kind of information should be shared.
Okay, thank you, AJ. Marlene is back. Go ahead, Marlene. Oh, Marlene, are we having the same? Make sure it should say unmute on your screen. Can you Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you.
There you are. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say basically the same thing. I'm really concerned about the whole hiring process. You know, it's the police services board, the mayor and his good friend who are on this board. You know, they had this task before the last police chief had been hired. We had the most perfect candidate who would have brought in such wonderful changes. And he, you know, he couldn't have been better. And they didn't have the guts to hire him at the time. And this guy disappeared. And many of us will remember that whole process. And we're watching this time. And, you know, I don't know what more to say about it, as though it's not just the courage of a new police chief, but the courage of the people who are doing the hiring. And they rarely have it. It's the same old feckless group of people who never do their jobs because it's politics, and they won't do what they're supposed to do for the people of this city. And it's intolerable.
Okay, thank you very much, Marlene. Vera, go ahead.
Thanks. So +1 to as much transparency as possible about who applied and what their result was. Another thing that I would want to know is if they come from a police service, which is very likely, their record on how they handled, what do I want to call it? Sorry, like when I'm like losing my words.
No problem.
When the police have a crime and they're accused of a crime, like how did they handle it? Like what's their track record on actually investigating police within their own service?
Okay.
And information about that, whether that's from within the Toronto service or somewhere else, because I think a big issue that surprisingly didn't come up that much was just like the impunity with which a lot of police kind of just get away with things. So I know Miguel was talking about Sammy Atim and how we still haven't really had justice for that young man. Like, I just want to know more about that. And also to Marlene's point, part of the reason that the board doesn't have the courage, I think, is because all these people are elected officials. And so they're also worried about like their own career. So I don't know how you can have someone like trying to save their own skin really have the ability. And like, I don't fault them. Like if everyone has a right to self-preservation, like how can they do the right thing if, you know, they're going to get kicked out of power if they do it?
Understood. Thanks very much, Vera. And Pauline, you've been in the queue for a while.
Hi, thank you. Really quickly, we keep talking about reform and change. Technically, the communities are hiring this police officer. So let's do something radical. Let the police board, I'm sure part of the interview process is for the candidates to make a presentation. Let those presentations be saved. And once the process is finished, let them be put out on YouTube or somewhere so the community can actually see the presentations before the final decisions are made and to weigh in on the process. I really think that will contribute to part of the transparency. They can only have so many people from the community sit in the actual interview, but this is a way to get the whole community involved and actually listen to their presentations, maybe even listen to the full interview process and then weigh in before the final decisions are made. I think that would really go a long way towards the transparency.
Great, thank you very much, Pauline. And we're just coming down to our final moments here. Sean, go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks for doing this. I know this is hard to do, and it's hard to manage a big group like this. So I appreciate the work that you and your team are doing. I guess I would say a couple of things about what should be shared, which is we should try and get as close as possible to everything. I think it would be really useful to share the results of not necessarily the absolute raw results, but a robust description of the feedback that was given by the community so that people can see that and they can see their voices reflected properly in it and see the guidance that the police board got. I think it would be super useful to have the police board sharing the structure and design of the posting that they put together and the logic that they put into drafting it that way. a few people have mentioned this, and it actually is increasingly common practice in hirings to have external folks come in and participate in the interviewing process, not just members of the board or people from the police service. So having external people on the hiring committee and having as much as possible a public process to engage people in the discussions and considerations that are happening would make a big difference. And I do hope that the feedback that's been gathered today is going to be shared in a fairly rich way, because I'd pay money just to have a copy of the chat that we had here, because it's so full of really good ideas that you can't really summarize in a pick three final conclusion. And so I don't know what the process is from here, but I really do hope that richness is going to be there as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Sean. Understood. I appreciate your comments. And Mark.
Yeah, I kind of just posted in the chat. I wasn't sure I would get time, but I think everything that was discussed today in terms of the qualities, and there was a guy by the name of Peter Soli, and I posted in the chat, but that he matches everything that was discussed today in terms of wanting this maverick or you want this radical, and the truth is in the pudding. He had to resign. So I feel like a lot of this, I understand you guys are just doing research to feedback, but a lot of this is just, it's symbolism at the end of the day. We had a guy named Peter Soli and he got kicked out.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for your comments. I am mindful of everybody's time. I see that we've reached 8 o'clock. I just want to share a little more information with you. Victoria, if you wouldn't mind putting the last slide up. I think we've covered much of that. Just so everybody knows, and I apologize to folks who've had their hands up. Hopefully you've had a chance to contribute to the chat. There are other opportunities to contribute, including a survey that will be available through the Toronto Police Services Board website. So we've put the URL there for you, as well. The YouTube channel where you can see the recording of this session, as well as the other sessions that are taking place with Toronto residents. We'll have Scarborough and North York coming up in the coming weeks. Those are available there too. You can watch them live when they occur. You can go back and watch the recordings. I want to thank everybody who set aside the time this evening to be part of this really important discussion. We really appreciate your feedback, your contributions. You've given us lots of very rich information to work with, and we thank you so much for being part of this discussion this evening. Thank you, and have a really wonderful rest of your evening.